Hello, I'm Bruce Stout for the Talk Show Factory News Network. Today we are going to have a very special program regarding the changes that the pandemic are causing regarding the New York real estate market. Today we're going to be speaking with Fernando Koatz, partner of Gleason Koatz LLP. Fernando, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Fernando, what can you tell us about the moratorium over residential and commercial evictions?
New York State issued a moratorium with respect to any eviction matters for commercial residential tenants when the pandemic began or shortly afterwards. With respect to commercial tenants, no action can begin after September 22nd. With respect to residential, they cannot begin until after October 1st. Now, landlords can file actions, but nothing will be heard after then, and I'm sure there will be quite a bit of a delay with respect to all these actions. Overlaying this is that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, imposed its own moratorium until December 31st with respect to any eviction actions, applying to tenants who have, for a single tenant, up to $98,000 a year in salary, or for two tenants living together, $198,000. The issue will be, once the courts open in New York, how this will be treated with respect to the CDC. No one really knows.
Okay, so then I understand that Governor Cuomo signed a Tenant Safe Harbor Act. What's that about?
The Tenant Safe Harbor Act has to do with respect to residential renters more than anything else. It says that if there's any problem with the tenant paying because of the pandemic, because they've lost their job, they suffer an illness because of COVID-19, the landlord has to apply the security deposit with respect to any rent. That's not the case with respect to commercial tenants, although there is a bill floating around in Albany in that regard to help them out. With respect to residential, yes, the landlord has to apply any existing security deposit to the rent that's owed for the tenant who has been unable to pay.
Okay, so then also New York Mayor de Blasio signed the City Council's personal liability bill. Please tell us about that.
Well, that's a controversial bill that was signed by de Blasio after the council passed it a few months ago. What it says in effect is that any retail, hospitality, any business like a gym or a barbershop or the like, if there's a personal guarantee, which can be a good guy guarantee or any other kind of guarantee, the owner, the business owner, is not liable on that guarantee because of failing to pay rent due to COVID. The issue there is whether this is constitutional, because some people, a lot of people, see it as an impairment of contract. And again, this is something else that will be litigated once the courts open up again with respect to these actions. But the important thing here is that the business owners are the ones who are protected on those guarantees. Whether this applies to people like me, lawyers or architects or CPAs, that's another question. Most people believe it does not. It's really aimed at the retail hospitality sector.
Okay, and so COVID-19, how is that affecting commercial and residential landlords and tenants?
COVID-19 has really affected both kinds of tenants, residential and commercial. Residential has the advantage that security deposit will be applied for those tenants who cannot meet their rental payments. For commercial, it really has been a disaster, both with respect to office spaces, retail, and the like. There are just not enough money to pay for these kind of rents the way New York is. New York already was very expensive, and given the fact that there's been a downturn in business and that people aren't even using their offices for the most part, it's really been a terrible situation. In my building, for example, which is Midtown on 42nd and Lex, what I get anecdotally from the Garza there, that maybe 30% of the occupants show up on a regular basis.
Wow, that's quite a drop, isn't it? The vacancies are huge. 70% don't show up. That's amazing to me.
Yes, that doesn't translate to whether there's vacancy, because the landlords may say, well, we have 90% occupancy, but there's no way of proving that. All this is anecdotal. It's a very bad situation. I know, for example, the Vanderbilt, which was just opened, one Vanderbilt on Monday, they have 70% occupancy right now, or leases have been signed, when usually it should be 80% for a luxury building like that.
Wow. So will there be a change in the appetite to work and live in New York post-COVID?
Well, that's a good question, because we don't know. Right now, people who work and live in Manhattan are scared. I take the subway every day, but that's a risk for a lot of people. They don't want to do it. They're scared of being in contact with others who may or may not have the virus or carry it with them. And they're worried about the work, whether there's sufficient protections in hand, what kind of things the building lobbies are doing with respect to people who come in, what the actual layout of the office is. There's a lot of fear. Without that vaccine, and not only the vaccine, the widespread use of the vaccine, I really believe it's going to have a very negative effect on with respect to commercial tenancies and residential as well.
How did the pandemic affect real estate inventory?
Real estate inventory has been affected in several ways. If you're not a fulfillment center or storage facility, it's really bad. The prices may not have gone down, but people are not happy where they are. They're happy because financially they can't pay the rents. Landlords are being very hard for the most part because they have, unfortunately, their own situations where they owe on mortgages, real property taxes. They haven't been given any relief in that regard. So the situation is really up in the air. The inventory, though, is going to be a question of who relents first, buyers or sellers. And right now it's kind of dicey. I know Manhattan is really bad. However, in terms of residential, more people from Manhattan not only are leaving the state, but they're going to other boroughs, New York, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx, and they're seeing more activity in that regard.
Yeah, this may be actually the most important question I'm going to ask you, and that's what items should tenants and landlords be reviewing in their leases at this time?
Well, the problem is more than anything else with the commercial tenants. They have to understand that the obligation to pay rent is sacrosanct under the law. New York law really protects the landlords, certainly pre-pandemic. We don't know what's going to happen once the courts open again. So you have to look at the lease before anything else. The lease clause that really apply, for example, a force majeure. Everybody talks about force majeure with respect to a pandemic, unless it's specifically in the lease, and more leases are starting to come around to that, but most leases don't have it because no one really could have foreseen how terrible this pandemic would have been. However, if that language is not in there, you're not going to be protected by what's force majeure, an act of God which relieves a tenant from paying its rent. Other lease clauses may help. Casualty, which is really destruction of the property, condemnation, which is really the government steps in and takes over a building, those rarely apply. Or co-tenancy, that helps in a shopping center sense, where the smaller tenants will only move into a shopping center if there is an anchor tenant there. But if that anchor tenant leaves, they can have clauses in there to protect them and relieve them of the rent because they're not going to stay there. It's not worthwhile. That's just the leases. They should look at insurance. Now, business interruption insurance is a big question, but most business interruption insurance doesn't really help out because it has to do with physical damage to the actual premises. It's not going to really relieve the tenants. So then they have to look at the common law. And the common law is not really that favorable to date anyway, because the judges, again, sitting in New York, haven't had to make the big decisions yet with all the people who've suffered and the consequences of COVID. But the common law, for example, has impossibility of performance. What is impossibility of performance? That has to be something that's truly unpredictable. A really crazy example would be, for example, a tornado coming through Lower Manhattan. That's not common. If a tornado comes in and destroys a property or creates so much damage you can't go to work, yes, you will be probably protected, but that's really unusual. Another common law defense is frustration of purpose, but that's also very difficult to be successful in that defense. It has to be something that really goes to the purpose of the contract itself. An extreme example would be a shopping mall in which for some reason someone builds a wall or a giant separation separating each half of the shopping center so one can't get to the other side. That would be frustration of purpose. But you can see that's an extreme example.
Explain to me a little bit more about frustration of purpose. What exactly is that?
The frustration of purpose, and it sounds like a circular argument, basically says that if the purpose of the contract is actually frustrated such that it can't be carried out by the parties, either one, then the contract is void. In other words, there's no obligation to pay the rent on behalf of the tenant or the landlord to provide the space, which is highly unusual. So in the case of the tenant, it has to be something that says you can't use this property for what you expressly wanted to use. It's a very difficult thing to prove, and New York is very much in favor of landlords in that regard. Examples are very, very few far in between that would apply as a kind of defense to help out commercial tenants.
So are you working with tenants and landlords regarding these issues? And this must be a real hot button for them, and they must be turning to attorneys like you quite a bit. Is that what's happening now?
Yes, it is. The important thing here, and I think the best thing for any commercial tenant to do, and I usually represent commercial tenants, is to communicate with the landlord. The landlords may be hard because, again, they do have their reasons to be hard, because the law has been up until now very much in their favor. And again, they have to pay on mortgages, bridge loans, construction loans. They have to pay real property taxes. Nobody has come in to say, let's help them out, which I think would be a good way of ameliorating the situation, because then the landlords could, in theory, pass down that kind of relief to the tenants. So it's important to communicate, to offer something, rent restructuring. You can extend the lease. Maybe if you're in retail or restaurant, offer the possibility of paying a percentage of whatever you take in as income to the landlord to show, hey, I'm only taking 25%. I want to pay X amount of dollars on my rent as opposed to what I had contracted before. It's about negotiation and trying to find some kind of way to protect everybody.
Okay. What else would you like to add?
I would just like to add that all these situations here are really in flux. There's a lot of tumult, or tumultuous situation, a lot of turmoil. Things will shake out the way they will. So it's a very variegated market right now. And you have to divide it into, or focus on whether you're talking about office spaces or retail, whether you're talking about sales or purchases and the like. And to really have someone there who's advising you, who understands the situation, and to communicate and be in touch rather than resort to litigation or literally putting your head in the sand. That will not help you at all.
Okay. How can people reach you?
They can reach me at Gleason and Koatz. My email address is fkoatz@gleasonkoatz.com. Please feel free to reach out to me and ask any questions. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Thanks, Fernando. This has been
Thank
Bruce
you.
Stout for the Talk Show Factory News Network. Thank you for joining us.